Okay, not on, okay, there it is on there. There we go.
7 o'clock.
It is 7 o'clock. Let's call this meeting to order. Regular meeting of the Board of Directors for Sudden Valley. And roll call, let the record show that we have four directors who are not here tonight. That would be Whitney Pierce and Sarah Holmstrom, and ACC Chair Rich Bailey, and the NNE Chair Lee Langston. Adoption of agenda. Are there any changes, deletions, additions that anybody would like to make at this time? Hearing none, we'll adopt the agenda by acclamation. Announcements. Okay.
I have, excuse me, I have two. The first one is a rather good point. We have now officially been delisted by the DOE for Area Z. We received a letter.
So awesome.
I've been waiting 20 years for this.
It's been a long time, and it is finally done and completed.
Yes.
So, the other one is the heater downstairs in the sunshine room died probably late yesterday afternoon, last night. We're in the process of getting some bids, but I need a heater there, so we do have capital money for this building. I just wanted to give everybody a heads up that we will be going out to get something ASAP. So.
This is a maintenance matter. It's not a board a capital vote, right?
It will be capital vote,
It will be
because it's about $5,000 right now is the first preliminary price we got, but we got to get it fixed, and we're going to put it out and try to get it done as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you. Carol?
Because it's $5,000, what Joe and I have talked about is he'll go ahead and get the bids, and as soon as we have an idea of what it's going to cost and what his recommendation is for who to replace it with, that perhaps the executive committee could get together and approve the fee and then have it ratified. I mean, we have to have the heater. We can't. It was 54 degrees in there this morning, something like that.
Something like that, yes.
We can't leave it that
Yeah,
way. So,
okay.
emergency.
Yeah. Other announcements? Eric?
I'd like to thank everyone that showed up and participated in the Sudden Valley Board of Director candidate forums. The second one was held last evening downstairs here, and it went for almost exactly 2 hours. And it was, I think everybody would agree that it was informative, and not a whole lot of people left before it was over, so that's nice. But we have another candidate forum coming up on this Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock, right here in the dance barn. Now, this is not Sudden Valley Board of Directors forum. It is people who are running for county executive, sheriff, state senator, and council member that are going to be here. And so there are 4 seats that are open, and 8 candidates, and we hope to have them all here. And it starts at 2 o'clock sharp. It will be informative, and these people will be representing Sudden Valley outside of Sudden Valley, including at the state level. So it's very important that we show them that we exist at the very minimum. So this Sunday, 2 o'clock.
What's the format of that meeting?
The format is going to be just like it was last year, where the candidates will make their 2-minute opening statements, and then there will be questions that are posed of the candidates that are given to me on 3x5 cards, and then they'll finish that up, and then they'll have closing statements. We'll start off with the county level first for the first 45 minutes. And then have a small break, transition, and then the next period will be for the Senate seat. Okay.
Other announcements? Mike?
The Emergency Preparedness Committee is going to have their second grab-and-go bag workshop on November 23rd in the dance barn. It begins at 10 o'clock. It'll be done by noon-ish. You have to remember that you have to pre-register. And these will be around town, community. You'll be able to get the email address and make sure that if you want to come, you have to register for that. The second thing is, and I don't know that much about it, so I'm going to turn it over to Norm and Lisa as far as the new safety alert program that we have in Sudden Valley now? Pick one.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Rock, paper, scissors. All right, we've implemented a text alert system. So it's live and it's ready, it's on our website. So when people subscribe to the e-blast, they can also subscribe to a text alert system, and that will be used for road closures, down trees, emergency events. We're not going to spam people on their phones. But we've already, just in the last announcement, we already have almost 400 people signed up. So we're really hoping that this is an effective way. I know that the school districts use it. I know I get text messages from my bank and my doctor. So it's a really great way to go when you've just got just an announcement, no response needed. You're not going to get a phone call, and you don't have to check our website. So hoping that this is an effective means of communication.
Right, and if again, I don't know that much about them, but this is on our page. And all they have to do is go to sb.com/alerts.
SuddenValley.com, and then right on the landing page on the left-hand side, you'll see subscribe to e-blast, and there's also subscribe to the text messaging alert system.
And just give your telephone.
All you have to do is put in your cell phone number, and you'll just automatically get
And
texted.
you're good to go. Mm-hmm. Oh,
And
it's a great idea. We've been hoping something like this was going to come along. The Emergency Preparedness Committee has been hoping something like this was going to come to Sudden Valley. So this is a good thing for you to have. So please take advantage. I would appreciate that. That's it, ma'am.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, hearing no more announcements, let's move to property owner comments.
Linda Bradley, 2782. Thank you for sending me the answer to my questions. One of them I still have some concern about, and that's the amount that's allotted for the culverts, ditches, and swales. And in part of the answer to me, it says that each year the roads budget includes an escalation in the amount to be dedicated to the culverts, ditches, and swales. However, that special assessment that approved that only approved $3.01, no escalation, no nothing in there. And I know one year, and I don't think it was this year, but the year before, the first year they did it, they didn't spend all the money, and there was a carryover, and that was brought before the board, was discussed, and I believe voted on. And I think that that's an easier way of doing it. It's just that there's an additional $60-some thousand that are being allotted. I looked at the spreadsheet that, in theory, we were all supposed to look at if we were following all this, and there was only $110,000 budgeted for that. And so I guess I'm really concerned that sometimes we're spending a lot of money that maybe isn't approved, that's all. I might have some other questions after these answers, but I'll do what I did before. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, seeing nobody else, let's have some board comments. Carol?
Okay, so Linda's right. We set aside a certain amount of money during the SGM to allot for the ditches, swales, and culverts. And I don't recall that there was any escalation in it, but our assumption was that in order for us to continue to do the same kind of work, we should escalate at 3%. So we just did that to make sure that it was set aside and that the project would never run out of money. You're correct. The first year, we couldn't get it all done because we didn't get started with the equipment until halfway through the season. So we had like $50,000 left over. So it got carried over. And we still are not able to catch up because we just haven't had the right number of people and the right, the right ability. There have been challenges with it. So each year, we're carrying it over. The point is, we don't spend that money on anything else. All that is the amount that has been set aside for it. So though it looks like it's high this year, it's just carried over from a prior year. It will eventually be spent. And I did talk to Joe. Joe and I had a conversation about this. Bruce is looking at an alternative strategy that we think will get us further along, but we need to catch up because we need to get it done. But there's no money coming from being pulled from anything else. It's all just that.
A question for you. When money is voted at a special general meeting, such as for the ditches and swales, that is set aside and it cannot be used for anything else except the intended purpose for which the members voted.
Yes, and in fact, when we had the last engineering study done for the roads, it actually set that money aside and put it into a specific box
Yeah.
each year for the next 10 years, which we hope, well, not 10 now because we're a little ways along in it, but we hope that it will be done within 10 years and then that money can be allocated elsewhere.
Thank you. Larry?
Yeah, just a question in that regard for clarification. It is correct to say that, is it not, that the special assessment that was voted on did not prevent the board from budgeting for an increase due to inflation. It merely said this is what would be collected from the members under that special assessment. That if the board wants to add more into that budget, the board can do so. Is that not correct?
Yeah, it was considered a high priority item, and so we did decide to escalate it. And the one thing I want to make clear is that was not a special assessment. What was the special assessment was the purchase of the, what do we call it? The super sucker? Super sucker, it's a hydrovac.
The
And
hydrovac,
it's
yeah,
the piece
yeah.
of equipment that they
Correct.
used, which was, which was one reason we did not get started early that first year because we were waiting for delivery on that item. So, but yeah, we have set it aside because that's what it was intended to do, to make sure that that happened.
Okay. Other board comments?
Yeah, I just want to point out that, for the record, this postcard that was sent to everybody in the community is completely untrue. There is, in fact, no dues projections. There never has been any dues projections for any year other than next year. Statement that there is supposed to be a 13% dues increase with an additional special assessment planned to fund several projects. That's a real new one to me. Anybody remember voting on an additional special assessment?
Not quite so sarcastic, just comments, please. Thank you.
Okay.
Anything else?
And the last one is that some of the bylaw amendments would quote-unquote remove our ability to seek legislative relief. That is completely untrue and another disgusting.
Okay. Other comments? Okay, hearing none, let's move on to review of the SVCA policies that we have been just kind of floating past for the last couple of meetings.
Okay,
And let's see what we can get done tonight.
Let's run by these really quick. First off, I'm sorry these never got put into later packets, but the first section I think we need to get rid of, and I believe we'd already voted to get rid of 1 year, but they're still on the website, and that is all of the regulations and rules pertaining to golf.
Agreed. Okay, does anybody like to make a motion to that effect?
I move that all of those golf things be removed.
And there's a second. All right, discussion on those?
Call the question.
Just a brief explanation for people who do not have them in front of them. These were created 20, 30 years ago when the board controlled the golf club.
You want me to
And it
run?
has to do with a dress code, et cetera, which is just no longer pertinent. Anyway, yes, I will call the question. All those in favor of removing these? That is unanimous. Thank you.
Okay, the
Next.
next section has to do with the board. There is a petition resolution, agenda requirements, 25-year capital plan, joint resolution, that is 2024. It refers to the density reduction program, which is no longer in effect. There is one on contracts, 2005-01. It is That one, although it is probably outdated, it probably needs some finance committee input. I believe it's already been superseded, but I'd prefer to have the committee take a look at it. Board meeting excused absences, Sudden Valley Communications Policy, declaration of weather emergency, attribution policy, which is really unclear why they call it that.
That has to do with the views.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. That anybody who put an article into the views had to
Oh,
identify
there we go.
themselves.
There we go. May have been useful to prevent fake or anonymous views submittals, but now that the Tribune fully controls that, it's completely unnecessary. Conduct of board meetings, Board of Directors year-end evaluation, we have never done that, really. Annual budget development policy, again, outdated, and board orientation. So my motion is to, I move to delete all of those except the ones that need to be taken a look at. Let me get your pen if I might, sir. All right, that's to delete all of those board-specific except the 2005.01,
Which says,
which is the contract policy, and Finance Committee should take a look at that, but that's not part of the motion. And let's see here. Okay, 2010.08, board orientation. Those two should probably stay in and be revised, but all of the rest,
sorry, what's the other one that should stay in? What's the other one that should stay in?
2005.01.
Yes,
And 2010.08.
10.08.
The first one has to do with contracts, the last one has to do with board orientation.
Okay.
I move that all of the others be removed.
Discussion. Oh, was there a second?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Discussion. Any concerns on any of these? As a matter of fact, if we feel in the future that we need a policy, the board can create it. So it is, okay. Carol?
That's what I was going to say.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And
The only other thing I was going to say is, does staff have any concerns about any of these being removed?
You got me in my candy bar. No, none whatsoever.
okay, all right. All those in favor of removing? So done unanimously. Next.
The next section is general administration. The first one has to do with bikes on Lake Louise. And this particular policy allows bikes on part of Lake Louise Trail, but not on the rest. And my understanding is that that has been completely banned, so this is kind of a not valid policy. There is enforcement of documents. Again, completely unnecessary. We have an administrative operations, standard operations procedure and manual, and I think all of this kind of stuff is covered in that. 2000.21 has to do with a contract with AT&T, again, completely irrelevant.
Obsolete.
Obsolete. 2009.05, Association Records Inspection Policy. In fact, we have a later policy on that. And 2009.08 having to do with support for celebrations and events. Once again, all of these things are covered in the existing operations. We do not need these particular policies. They, in fact, in some respects, they conflict with what we have already voted on more recently. So I move that all of those be deleted. They're all on the website underneath general administration.
Second.
Okay. Anything? Andrew?
So the AT&T contract is
Could you
termed
move a
out.
little closer to the
Has
microphone?
the AT&T contract termed out?
Yeah, that contract that is referenced in that particular policy has long gone.
It's probably when AT&T had the cable network out here, we know, you know. Comcast, et cetera?
Channel 10.
Okay, nothing. Okay, discussion, anything else?
Call the question.
All those in favor of the motion? Unanimously passes, okay.
Okay, the next section regards general manager. Once again, we have a contract and we have operations procedures that we've already voted on and approved. So 2010-01, 2010-05 has to do with executive accountabilities and limitations and general manager's year-end evaluation. Completely irrelevant under the contract and the current operations.
And so,
I move that those two be deleted.
is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Concerns? Comments?
Call the question.
All those in favor? Unanimous, okay.
Okay, the next one is a single policy. It's called security, and it deals with unauthorized vehicles. I will point out that it probably should be replaced, but clearly it is outdated. So I'm going to move that that one be deleted and recommend that staff take a look at coming up with a better replacement.
Policy number, please.
That is 2009-04.
Okay.
That was a motion.
And we have a second? Yeah, okay. Discussion? All those in, Eric?
Yeah, if we are looking at having any policy superseded by a potentially new policy that staff would recommend, why wouldn't we keep the existing policy until we have a recommendation to change it?
Because we'd have to enforce it.
Well, I
Well,
guess,
since that's a question to me, recommending these things, if you take a look at it, and I believe that over the last several board meetings, there's been plenty of opportunity to take a look at it, you'll find that it is completely out of date, and there's just no point in having it on the books.
I agree with that. I was speaking in more generally.
More generally, once again, I would suggest that our security staff and our staff in general come up with something that is both more relevant to today's situation, that's 10 years old now, and actually enforceable.
I'm writing down here the numbers of those that we've suggested we would like to replace, and we will move forward with those. Any other comments on that? All those in favor of this, deleting this motion? Unanimous passage. Next.
Next is listed under investments. It's a single policy, 2003.01. That is clearly outdated. Our investments just don't follow this and haven't in a bunch of years because we have new and far more appropriate procedures that we follow that probably don't. Again, a lot of the things that we do now are pursuant to our standard operating procedures, which the board can take a look at if it wishes, but that we do not need a policy to address that kind of thing.
What's the number, 2003?
0.01.
0.01, okay.
I move that that be deleted.
Second.
Discussion? Carol?
I think it's really hard for us to keep up with all of the regulations and so forth regarding investments, and we usually work with our bankers depending on what our financial situation is too, and I'd hate to put any barriers up that could prevent us from doing the best job we can, and I don't think you can regulate that with a policy. I would say that you're better off just to work with that as issues develop.
Okay. Other comments?
Call the question.
All those in favor of that motion? It is unanimous, motion passes. Next section?
Next section has to do with real estate. This one is not so easily dealt with. 2001.05 has been replaced by the 2017 policy on lot consolidations. 2001.07 probably needs to be reviewed, but is reasonable enough to be allowed to remain. That has to do with lot donations, and there will be a further consideration of that later in tonight's meeting. Similar with 2001.08, so I'm not really addressing any but 05. Then there's,
So what are you suggesting at 2001?
all right, well, let's do it in chunks then. I move that we delete 2001.05 because that has already been replaced by another policy.
Second.
Sorry, yes, we need to.
Okay.
Okay, now,
Carol?
I have a question.
Yes.
So does the 2017 say that it supersedes that 2001-05?
Yeah, that's my recollection without having looked at it again. I
I've
believe.
forgotten when I looked at it
I
what it
believe
said.
that when you go into 2001-05, you'll find actually what is there is the 2017 policy.
Doesn't make sense why it's even still there then.
Well, the numbering needs to be changed.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose that may be a more appropriate way of dealing with it.
I would suggest at this point that since we do not have a definitive answer, that we just leave it the way it is until
We'll leave it
I think
we
we should
can
research
re-examine
it,
it, yeah.
At the very least, it should be taken a look at. I think the
Yes.
main thing is
It's
to
noted
change
down
the
here. Would you
number.
like to withdraw that motion, please?
I withdraw that particular
Thank you.
motion.
Next.
All right, so now we get into 2002.01.
Category?
There's still real estate.
Okay.
2003.07. Both of those are completely out of date. One has to do with lot sales, and the other has to do with a community plan. We do not have a community plan. Whatever community plan existed in the past is long outdated. Again, that was 2003, that's 16 years ago. And lot sales, we have completely redone how lot sales are handled. In that particular policy, the executives, not the board, were to approve lot sales using a board-approved price, and then all income was to go to density reduction. Well, that's fine with regard to density reduction. That's not the issue, but our processes have been completely revised. We've done completely different types of sales for the last 7 years.
Is that a motion?
Yeah, the motion is to delete 2002-01 and 2003-07.
Second.
Discussion? Andrew?
So we're removing the policy because we've changed the way that we've done things?
Right. We're not following that policy.
Is that a concern to anyone?
The board has been more involved than this policy would have recommended. This policy laid it on the executive committee. What we have done since then is the whole board has made a decision.
So, okay, so that's the definition of it being outdated, then, is because we've changed the way that we've
Yeah, we have completely redone that. Again, this was 2002, and this was still during the period of density reduction, and we were getting lots
Yeah.
in a lot of different ways, and the entire issue of lot sales was viewed in a completely different perspective.
This is 2002 point,
That was 2002.01.
okay.
And then there's 2003.07, which has to do with the community plan, which does not
Yeah, okay.
exist.
No, I just want the one on the board involvement, because I think that if we do release that one, that we need to redo or look at perhaps a replacement for that. So that I'm just writing down the numbers on that. Okay.
I did not recommend anything because I
Right.
recall over the last 7 years, we have done several different things. We've had bidding, we've had private requests for bids.
Right.
Lots of different things that we've done. So if there is one single policy to be followed, I have no idea what it would be.
It's worth a discussion.
But this one needs to go.
Okay, okay. Any more discussion on these two? All those in favor? It's unanimous.
Okay, the next section is human resources. Again, we have an entirely new HR policy, personnel policy that we've had for several years, and as well as this first one, 2006.05, has to do with office access. Again, that's part of our standard operating procedures. We do not need any of these because they've been superseded by our personnel policy. What, personnel handbook, what is it called? Lisa?
It can be called either employee handbook, personnel manual. I mean, it's a
Okay,
couple
all right,
of-
whatever it's titled, you know, we voted on that not too long ago.
It was approved in 2018.
What?
It was approved in 2018, the
2018.
latest version with the new state laws enforced.
So none of these are appropriate anymore, especially because they're all 13 years old.
So your motion will be to remove the entire HR section?
Yeah, the entire section, that would be, for the record, 2006.05, .06, .07, and .09.
Is there a
Those-
second?
Those four.
Okay. Discussion.
Call the question.
All those in favor of removing the HR policies? Unanimous, okay?
Okay, the next section has to do with accounting and dues. I am not recommending that these be removed at this time, although some of them are clearly out of date, such as 2003-05 having to do with the Byron Tract funds. Nonetheless, and I believe also that we have existing policies for some of these things in our operating procedures. Nonetheless, I'm suggesting that these should be referred to the Finance Committee for review and to see if they need to be replaced or just deleted.
Okay, this is both
I'm not making a
accounting and
motion.
dues?
I'm not making a motion.
No, I know, but this section is accounting and dues.
It's accounting/dues.
Okay,
I can
Carol?
list the numbers, but since they're
Yeah.
all up on the website under this heading.
yes.
It's not really necessary. Okay, so I'm not making a change, but I would recommend that the next Finance Committee take a look at these.
My recommendation is it first goes to the accounting manager. I think a lot of these things, he would be able to identify things that are already part of a procedure or an SOP. And then he can take it to the finance committee if he feels that it needs it, or bring it directly to the board for approval.
Okay.
I'm sure, Jennifer actually went through a list with me and gave me a list, which I can perhaps give to Joel as well. And
Okay.
between that and the finance committee, I think we can come up with a better list, because some of them are very outdated.
Okay, so basically, we're just going to recommend that this section be reviewed, okay, and brought back as necessary. Anything else?
And the same disposition with the last section, which has to do with ACC.
Okay.
It involves building permits, easements, encroaches, trees, GM authority for ACC recommendations, and authority for the ACC manager to approve requests. All of this stuff needs to be reviewed.
Yes.
It's clearly old. It probably does not match the current set of ACC policies, or maybe something in here needs to be added
Added
to
to
the
that, yeah.
current set of ACC.
And that would be the more appropriate place to have it, is within the ACC
Abs-
policies itself,
It
yeah.
absolutely should not be a separate thing, because people need to be able to look at one.
Yeah,
So I'd
Right.
recommend ACC take a look at this and work with staff to come up with something better, or staff can work with them and tell them what they need to do. It doesn't matter.
okay,
So anyway, there we go.
all right. With
Done. Thank
no
you.
disagreement, we have dug ourselves out from a bundle of policies that we no longer adhere to. Anyway, okay, I'm looking at staff to update the webpage with the decisions that we've made tonight, okay? And I have a list of some policies here that we do want to look at again, and reviews by the ACC, or not ACC, yeah, ACC for one set, and the accounting for the other. Okay. We'll be done. Okay, moving on to emergency operations plan, evacuations. Who we got?
That's me to start out. In 2018, the Board of Directors made a priority that the Emergency Preparedness Committee provide a framework for evacuations out of each gate, at least 2 exits. What we have presented to the board tonight is the beginning of that strategic view. I hope that some of you might have questions. I have 2 experts here, Henry Renteria and Norm Smith, who both were principals in drafting this appendix that goes into our safety plan for the community. I guess you would have more questions if you could read it. So I will bring my copy out to you and see if you can come up with any questions that you would like to have answered, if you don't mind.
I'll give you mine too.
You want to take mine? In case people want another set.
Larry.
Oh, okay, if you'd like to do that, we can move on to some, the next agenda item. Yeah, that would be, okay. The end of year schedule. Now, this is something that we have done for the last, I don't know, 5 years. And it's put a schedule in place for the 2 months following the AGM, making some recommendations right now for dates to do things and so on and so forth. The first one is the organizational meeting. And we have typically held that at the end of the AGM. We regroup, go downstairs to the multi-purpose room, and at 5 o'clock we have the organizational meeting, at which point we elect president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. And according to our bylaws, that is the only thing that we can do at the organizational meeting. Now, eventually, I would like to change that so we could do some more besides just that. But meanwhile, since we can only do that, we will elect those officers, we will close the meeting, we will immediately open up a second meeting to approve committees, committee chairs, and whatever other business we need to do in order to start the new year, so that we can hit the ground running. We don't have to wait, a month before we decide even what committees we want to have. Let's see. Another one is we would like to set a date for orientation, if not a date, just to state that we will have 3 new members on the board. Whoever they are new. And it would be good for them to come up to speed as soon as possible to understand Sudden Valley, what's going on, what are your responsibilities, what are your legal issues, your HR issues, and so on and so forth. And my recommendation for orientation is as early in December as possible. And then my 4th recommendation is that November and December, we only hold 1 meeting. With the holidays and everything, it becomes problematic. So I'm looking at meetings in November for November 14th and in December for December 12th, which would be regular meeting times anyway, but just forget the ones on Thanksgiving and on Christmas. So let me make some motions one at a time. First of all, I move that the Board of Directors hold 1 meeting in November and 1 meeting in December, November 14th and December 12th.
Second.
Is there any discussion on this? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. I should probably throw in another aside here. What we are doing is putting down a general set of guidelines for the new board. If the new board doesn't like it, when they come in, they can change it. But we want to put some things in place right now so that we are organized, when we get there. The second motion is I would like to ask the general manager to set up orientation for the board as soon in December as is possible. Agreed? Okay. Third, I move that we hold our organizational meeting immediately following the AGM, and at the end of that meeting, immediately have another meeting to work on organizing our committees for the following year.
The same day?
The same day, yep.
So there's,
Ideally, I would like to have it all in one meeting, but according to our bylaws, we can't do that. So we'll have 2 meetings back to back.
So I'll second that motion.
Okay, any discussion?
Yeah.
So we're talking about both of those in one motion.
Yes.
I just would like to ask, because I assume the answer is known, if the incoming board decides to change these, that will also be up to them.
They have, if that's what they choose to do, yes, that's fine, but then we will cancel those meetings and set them up for whatever time they want to have them.
Just clarifying
Yeah.
that that statement applies to this motion like it did to the last motion.
Yeah, yep.
question I have is the agenda on meeting number 1
Yes,
is just to elect the executive committee
correct.
people. The second part would be the committees, but I sense a little bit of a kerfuffle there in that the committees, except for 2 of them, maybe 3, are all ad hoc and have to be chartered yearly, and their charter runs out at the AGM. So in reality, they don't exist as a committee on November 2nd. So how do we deal with that?
What we will do at that meeting is to discuss what committees we want to have. Do we want to continue with the committees that we have now? And if we do that, who is willing to chair each of those committees so that by the next meeting they can bring forward a proposed charter and members to be approved by the board. But if we wait until that next meeting to define what committees we want and the chair, then it becomes December before we can actually charter the meetings.
Okay, that a little bit of a problem on that one too. So therefore, all new members would have to be vetted between the 2nd and the 14th of November, because you said the charter would be presented on the first meeting in November. All charters, correct?
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so that, I mean,
it-
I don't know how many people that is.
It will be a work in progress. If you have the chair can bring, at the first meeting in November, bring forward the charter, which is pretty much the same as the previous year, if it's a committee that has already existed. And then the chair will suggest members. And then if he wants, or she wants to bring on more members, we can continue to approve members, you know, as we go. We don't have to
Right.
have everything at once, yeah.
Okay, all
Larry?
right.
Yeah, this year, we have been operating under the new rules that we understand now, different from in previous years, that directors do not have to be chair.
Okay,
So I'm curious as to how it will work if you're asking the board of directors who wants to be chair of various committees when it is not required that they be chair. What we've called them this year is board liaison with certain committees. If we knew that that committee had someone who wanted to be chair and wasn't a member of the board. So are you suggesting that this will go back to the older policy where we're saying, no, the chair is the board of the committee? Is that what you're doing?
no. What I'm saying is if somebody wants to chair a committee, they can step forward and say so. And if But we don't find anybody who's interested, we can open it up from there. We can be flexible. Paula?
Oh, I just wanted to point out, I think this is the exact process we went through this year with, right after, and then we went directly and had the 2 meetings,
Okay.
and then brought everything forward. I think this is the same thing that we did this year.
Okay. Eric?
Madam President, Eric.
Yeah, one note about last year is we decided to allow committees that had existed to continue until the next full board meeting and in their existence.
That was my next
Yes.
motion.
Okay. And then another reason for having the meeting with directors and the charters is a director has to bring forth a charter to the board to have it created. And so that's, I think, where it's very important that a director gets involved with a particular committee.
Yeah, even if they don't wish to chair it themselves, I think that you have to have a director as being the responsible person to bring information back to the board from the committee. Any other questions? Nope. Carol?
You're treating the finance committee differently,
I am.
Thank you,
That's, my next motion is going to be.
thank you.
So call the question on that motion.
All right, all those in favor of the meeting? Unanimous, okay. And then the final motion is something, again, we have done in the past several years. Voted to approve the Finance Committee members, the current members, to continue until a new Finance Committee has been set up. Because, again, we will have a new treasurer next year in charge of the Finance Committee, and they need some time to set up the committee membership. And this will allow them to operate in case we have any finance questions that need to be answered between now and then. So I move that the Finance Committee be allowed to continue until the first meeting in December, when the new treasurer names the members that have been requested to be on the new Finance Committee.
Second.
Discussion.
Question?
Andrew?
When the new treasurer comes on board, then what would be the process for a potential new finance committee applicant to join?
Members can go online and fill out applications, and those will be presented to the new treasurer. Carol?
Yeah, I just want to make sure everybody understands that if you are on a committee now, or if you want to be on a committee in the future, you must apply again. Every year, we have to vet all of our committee members. And as for the treasurer or the finance committee, usually, I don't know, this is what I did. I interviewed all people who applied and talked to them a little bit about being on the finance committee. And so the treasurer actually gets to select, and they're limited in the number of people that can be on the finance committee. It's 5 to 7. So it's a little different than your usual committee where you can just have, you know, a huge number if you wish. So that's the only difference with the finance committee.
And just to add to that, for anybody that has not done the application to be on a committee, you only have to do one. You don't have to do them for every committee you're going to be on. Just when you fill it out, put down the committees that you think you would like to be on, so you don't have to do it ad infinitum.
Other questions, comments? All those in favor of approving the Finance Committee continue? It is unanimous, okay? All right, we have next year started already. Okay, you want to go on now? We've given people enough time to look over the emergency evacuation materials.
Might I ask that if you do have a question, please come up to the podium so that everyone could hear you?
Okay.
Who is it?
Is it a question having to do with the emergency?
No. Only if you have questions. No questions?
No.
No
Okay.
questions in the back? David? No questions? Sorry, Henry. Sorry, Norm. Would you like to give a quick rundown so that, yeah?
Please.
Thank you. Yeah, Mike, I think that would be beneficial for that.
Yeah.
Let me just make a couple remarks and I'll turn it over. Hello?
Yeah,
Turn it over to Norm. Hi, my name is Henry Rancheri. I'm a member of the Emergency Preparedness Committee. I know some of you from some of the orientations we've done. And just really quick to recap, one of the issues that we've been working on at the board's request was to prepare an evacuation plan for Sudden Valley. Happy to report that a plan does exist. It's incorporated into the Sudden Valley Emergency Plan as one of the annexes. A call to your attention to that document. I think some of you have already have it there. It defines what Sudden Valley has to do in order to work with county and city and state officials with respect to evacuation issues relative to Sudden Valley. The good news is we do have a plan in place. The relationship with the government agencies, especially the county, which is the primary response agency for this area, has been established. You have a staff person who is responsible for preparing this and continuing that relationship, and that's Norm Smith. Norm has been working diligently to make sure those relationships continue to exist, and this is the key that I really want to make. Evacuation plans rely on two major ingredients. The first is a relationship with the government agencies that are responsible for not only making sure that emergency plans are in effect, but that the elements of that plan coincide with what the county is doing. Because the county has the first responders that we're going to depend on: fire, law, emergency medical, and our connection to federal and state agencies. What we've been doing for the last couple of years is Norm has developed a lot of straight relationships with these agencies, conducting joint exercises and looking into how their plans are prepared and laid out so that our plans can mesh into it. So that's what you have in place now. The second part is educating the community, and this is the part that I really want to emphasize to you as the board. Without a comprehensive education program, something that reaches out to the community to make them understand what it is that they have to do before, during, and after a major event. And the Emergency Preparedness Committee is working on that diligently, but we also need assistance from the other committees, especially communications, which is a very big issue with respect to communicating with the public, and the other committees that address the infrastructure of Sudden Valley and the resources that we have, because those all come into play when there is an evacuation notice. Now, evacuation orders are coming down from the county. The sheriff's office and the law enforcement people work together to make those decisions. We, in turn, become a support agency to those agencies. But prior to and before such an emergency, it's our responsibility as a community to engage the residents and educate the residents. So what I'm hoping will happen in the next 12 to 18 months as we continue to work on the education program and reach out to the other agencies, we'll develop a more comprehensive approach and come back to you and let you know what we're doing. As you know already, we do have a 610 AM radio system in effect. That's what the signs that went up. We have identified some staging areas that people would report to if an emergency was to happen. And we do have amateur radio, which is a very important part of what we have in Sudden Valley. So, and plus the volunteer agencies, the CERT program and the volunteer reception area programs that are working with our committee to develop these things. So, rest assured, we do have an evacuation plan. It's in place. We do have a lot more work to do with respect to education and reaching out to the community. And we'll be coming back to you and reporting you periodically. So with that, I'll entertain any questions if you have.
A quick question. I know you said that an emergency would be declared by?
The emergencies are declared by the government agencies that are responsible for that. If it was a federal emergency, obviously that's declared by the executive branch of the federal government. But all disasters start locally. They all happen locally. So if something would happen within the county emergency services office is the ones that reach out and implement the procedures for developing a local disaster and a local emergency, and we depend on them for that. Now, I know there's some confusion about what if it happens here in Sudden Valley, and we're the only ones that know about it. Well, yes, we request an emergency to be declared by the county. But it is our responsibility to the staff and through the committee to notify you, because the board is the one that would support what emergency actions we need to take as Sudden Valley if it was a localized event. Now, once law enforcement and fire respond, and we mesh with them and identify how resources will be deployed and what actions need to be taken in Sudden Valley. But that legal responsibility rests with the county.
And why wouldn't the executive committee or the general manager of Sudden Valley declare the emergency?
You could declare an emergency, but it really doesn't mean anything with respect to the bigger picture. What the agencies who what the agencies who are responsible for declaring an emergency want is to hear from us what happened, what are your needs, what do you need from us, how can we help you, how can we work together. Depending on the type of emergency, they would eventually take over control of how resources are deployed. However, they look to us and to our emergency personnel, which in this case is our security people, our emergency volunteers that are out there, and the committee, to educate them as to what is happening in Sudden Valley and what is it that we need. Because no one knows the area better than we do. But again, it's a joint effort with the county and with law enforcement and fire. Again, as you probably all know, our emergency operations center designation is the fire station. So the fire chief is a major player in this whole process. Not only are we going to be using the facility, but we'll have them shoulder to shoulder to help us respond to the event.
Thank you, Henry.
I do.
Norm, you want to add anything?
Carol?
Well, just one thing to add is, as Henry talked about the senior public official, if we had a Sudden Valley isolated event, is going to be your fire chief on that. And he's going to be working with us and working with Whatcom Unified, DEM, John Gargette's folks, to clarify what's going on this. To answer your question, Mike, on why the board wouldn't declare an evacuation, once you declare it, you have assumed legal and fiduciary responsibility for that evacuation. So the public service agencies, who are the professionals, are the ones that make that decision. Speaking with South Whatcom many times on this, general evacuation of Sudden Valley, like all 7,000 plus must leave, not a scenario they see as likely, although it could occur depending on what it is. However, there may be situational areas that have to be evacuated because of, let's say, a wildland fire, Upper Gate 5, or some of cliffs slushing off because of mud. That is what fire is looking at currently on how they do that, and that is where they would depend on Sudden Valley's emergency preparedness, posture, incident management people, staff, and governance to help facilitate that process. The other item to understand on this is that this, in Annex G in our emergency operations plan, is a work in progress. There are many infrastructure items that have to be looked at, which is going to be a long-range planning issue on some of this, along with staff. For example, Gate 1 or Gate 2, second entrance out of there, because the emergency planners look not so much as pedestrian, but as vehicle. That's going to have to be looked at. And these are long-term things that are going to involve other committees. Not only long-range planning, but it's going to involve the finance committee, because some of these things are going to be capital projects of some note. Anytime you put a road in, as we all know, permitting gets to become a great, lengthy, expensive subject. So this isn't going to get solved, a lot of it, in 18 months. This is a continuing process as we go through. And as we work with our other agency partners, including the Water District, South Whatcom Fire, the county, City of Bellingham, and our other citizens that live around the lake and their municipalities and their HOAs, we have to be aware that this is going to take a while to get this tactically and as well as, infrastructure-wise set. But the basic parts are set. We have discussions and we're working with our governmental agencies that support us to be able to respond and to respond to the incident and its potential in a responsible manner should that occur. Joe and I, at least I've had a lot of discussions about this stuff. We are continuing to try and work this through, but it's going to be, a lot of it's going to rest with the Public Safety Subcommittee for Long-Range Planning to help, because they're going to be writing that 3, 5, and 10-year picture. So you have your community plan, Andrew, and your 10-year outlook. What's it going to cost? What's it going to take? Do we have can we communicate effectively? Good start has occurred with the text messaging program that is now in place. That's a great start. We still have to address things about at the gates, for example, those kind of things. So it's a process. So I guess I'm going to close with this saying, appreciate it's been a year-long, Mike will tell you, somewhat of a struggle from time to time, and Carol getting this crafted before you, but it's not over. We'll probably have to be doing updates frequently on this, and at some point, it's going to have to be tested in a full-scale deployment, hopefully with county support.
Thanks, Norm.
Okay.
Yes, Henry? You have a question there?
Yeah, just two comments, actually. What was mentioned was potentially another exit out from 1 or 2 gates. I recommend highly that the board, whenever that comes up, work closely with the Washington Council of Governments, because they have lobbying activities going on regarding transportation projects at the state level and attempting to get funding for various transportation projects. It's a very slow process, but if funds are needed and potentially going to be sought from the state, it is invaluable to have COG's assistance and support. And to do that, you need to get on to their long-term project list. So as soon as that concept comes up, get on it with COG. Then the other thing is just a comment. Perhaps it's because I haven't been involved enough in all of that kind of stuff, but I am still very unclear who is responsible inside Sudden Valley for making a decision as to whether or not we think there ought to be an emergency. Is that a board responsibility? Is that the GM's responsibility? Is it the fire chief's responsibility, even though the fire chief has nothing to do with Sudden Valley per se? Or is it something that the Emergency Preparedness Committee has decided to do? And frankly, I don't really need the answer, but I'm letting you know that so far it's very confusing to me, and it would be, I think, very useful to a new board and the GM if that could be clarified.
Yes, actually, I can probably give you a good place to start. The board, this body here is responsible for the financial management and safety of Sudden Valley. Those are things you already are responsible for. So to answer your question, it's really the board through the general manager that has the responsibility to activate our emergency response plan. Yeah. What gets confusing is when you start talking about declaring an emergency versus not declaring. Anybody can declare an emergency. When you use the word emergency declaration in response to what the county or the state do, that releases money for agencies who qualify, and I use the word qualify. or disaster reimbursement. We do not qualify for that. That's only government agencies, nonprofits, special districts. We're quasi-governmental. This is a business. This is a business entity, or even if it was a nonprofit, you still would not qualify for disaster response funds. So that's the reason for declaring an emergency. Now, as far as when do we respond to a local event here because it's at an emergency level, that's a decision made during business hours by the general manager. If it's non-business hours, it's by whoever's in charge of security or whoever's on call. We have an emergency, we need to activate or do whatever we need to do. But that sets in motion what we have in our plan to respond. Activate emergency radio, get the CERT team out, pull out the trailer, get the amateur radio group going, those types of things. We decide that. It could be through again, whoever's on call or the general manager or who he designates. But then at some point, the board has to ratify those actions, especially if they involve money. So it's the same business as usual, only at an emergency level. One thing you have going in your favor, we're all residents. We all live here. So it's not like we have to bring you in order to put a board meeting together. In the Emergency Operations Center, the plan calls for you guys meeting there to perform emergency actions. Now, would it help to have some of these things in place before an emergency? Absolutely. So you need to think ahead. What do we do in case of? One issue that Mike and I had a spirited conversation about was, what do you do about paying employees who don't come to work because they're victims of an emergency and they have to stay home? That's a board issue. That's something you have to decide what to do. I can tell you cities and counties have had to put together their city councils and board of supervisors in order to make emergency actions to either pay employees or declare them, give them sick leave or whatever. But if they expect people to respond during an emergency, they need to get paid. And if they can't respond, do they still get paid, or does that count like a sick day? So those are things that you as a board can decide. But it is the responsibility that you already have are the ones that kick in place during an emergency as well.
So also, Larry, to Henry's point about after hours and business, the general manager is always on call with that. There's no absolute, he's not off even when he's gone to Pennsylvania in the middle of a snowstorm right here. I know, I called him all the time. But we're also working on better communications for that. So we're not going to be activating and pulling in employee resources and staff. That's going to be a decision that's going to come down and be made in discussion process, sometimes rather early in the morning, possibly really early in the morning. And then from there, if he has to bring in and set up time or conference call or whatever with the executive committee for, I remember Canyon Court a few years ago with all the trees falling down, that's when he'll make that decision. He's going to make like a city manager would. He will tell me, go do what you do, and we start getting things rolling on that aspect. So it starts kind of starts small, that's like any incident command process, and then goes. And understand that the general manager, along with myself and administrative services, are always on, pretty much on call for this stuff 24/7 because that's part of the job. So, Carol?
I think we're working very hard on trying to come up with a communications plan, but we've all had this discussion in our meetings about what happens if the cell towers stop working or power goes out. And I think this is going to be one of our biggest concerns that we have to address. I love the idea of the new alert system that the association has put in place, but without internet, without cell phones, we're going to feel like we're in the dark, regardless of whether it's daylight or not. And so I think it's important for all of us as board members, first of all, to figure out a way that we can always be reached, whether we have cell phones on or not. And as well as how do we reach all of our residents to let them know what's going on if we don't have Facebook and telephones and emails available, because that will cause chaos.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to a communication plan also in the next year, because I think it's very important to set the right expectations for people. If your expectations are too high and they aren't met, maybe you're not getting the help that you need. If they're too low and you feel like you have to do everything for yourself, maybe you're getting in the way of somebody else. So I think we've got to be able to explain, what is it in this kind of emergency, what can we expect, what kind of help can we expect, and so on and so forth.
Thank you both. I appreciate it.
I just want to thank all of you in closing, especially the committee members, Mike and Carol, and thank you, Larry, for attending our last training session. And lastly, I just want to point out again, for years we've been trying to get staff to attend training. And thank you, General Manager, because this was the first time we've had staff attend one of our training sessions. So we're really getting there. We've done a lot of work. There's still more to be done, but we're really getting there. I really want to thank you all for that.
Can we put this on the website? We put this out on the website?
You got it.
Yes, okay, good, thank you. Okay, moving on to a couple of policies here that Director Trower has brought forward for us. Would you like to address the first one, the budget development policy?
Yeah, sure. I'm sure I'm not the only person who remembers what happened on September 21st this year. We had an SGM where there was a good community turnout to talk about budgets and the development of budgets. And what happened a few months before September was the state refined Wakaiowa to demand that only the board has the authority to set levels of budgets. And so the two of those became in direct conflict, and we have legal opinion that says that the new bylaw is unenforceable. Now, the board gets to set the level of the budget and assessments. And so if the board creates a policy that says we will put in some caps, no matter what if they're arbitrary or not, but if we put in caps, then we actually are then conforming with the state law. And so my motion is to make it a policy of the board that the budget will be developed giving priority to mandated increases, meaning if there's minimum wage increases that we have to do, and will additionally be adjusted using limitations defined within the bylaw that became effective on September 21st, 2019.
Second.
Discussion? Larry?
Yeah, I'd just point out that this is what I would call a fig leaf, because as a board policy, it can be changed anytime, modified anytime, deleted anytime. This doesn't do anything should a board decide it needs more than what the bylaw amendment would permit. And, by the way, the bylaw amendment very clearly says that in emergency situations, those restrictions do not apply. And guess who gets to decide emergencies? The board decides when an emergency and what counts as an emergency. So I personally don't see that there's any point in this. It really doesn't do anything at all.
Madam President, Eric.
Yeah, I would certainly not characterize it as a fig leaf, because a policy that to follow what the levels are that are expressed in that bylaw, it includes the ability for the board to define an emergency. That's already expressed there. This simply refers us to that. But a policy like this is not going to be as easy to just sweep away by a future board, as we experienced early tonight with a bunch of policies that had become way outdated by decades. And I remember a couple of years ago, there was a policy that I felt that we should get rid of that was really, really a policy about credit for people eating at the restaurant that Sudden Valley owned decades ago. And when we tried to get rid of that policy, because we didn't even own a restaurant anymore, people came out with their hair on fire with pitchforks, saying that we were taking away one of their rights. And it was a really difficult thing, getting rid of a policy that had no sensible reason for existing at all. And so a policy like this, if the board, say next year in its development of the budget, decided to change this policy or just try to get rid of it, that would be a clarion call to the community to step up again. And so I think that a policy like this is something that can build bridges among the community and give people peace of mind that, no, this board is interested in listening to the community. This board is responsible for developing the budget, and we're going to try to do it as responsibly as the community believes that we should. And go ahead.
Okay, okay, and I wanted to state also that what you're doing is trying to control the actions of future boards, which technically we cannot do. Each one of them gets to make their own decisions, whether it's raising dues, lowering dues, et cetera, and we cannot effectively tie their hands from doing whatever that board wants to do. And to that end, I would like to make an amendment to this motion, stating that where it starts with "and will additionally be adjusted," say, "will consider using the limitations defined within the bylaws." And that way, it will bring that to people, to the board's attention each time they create a budget, but doesn't attempt to tie their hands one way or another. Is there a second on that?
Second.
Okay. A discussion on the amendment then to change it to consider using the guidelines. Eric?
As we just discussed, a board can get rid of one of these policies. So there is no, it's not that this handcuffs a future board. It certainly does more than encourage a future board. It's not handcuffs, though. It's more like velvet handcuffs, where the board can take them off themselves, but not without difficulty. And so I would speak against this amendment.
Madam President, Larry.
Larry?
Carol was first.
Carol, you're next.
Yeah, it's okay. I would have deferred, but since you said something, I'll go. Yeah, I don't know that the wording is as important as the intent here. I think our intent is to say that we agree that the bylaw is a reasonable thing to strive for, and agreed if we come across a situation, it's already in the bylaw measure that, you know, unusual needs will be able to be setting aside some of that. And, you know, I think that it's going to be up to future boards to interpret, because I think there are some still questions about the bylaw, but I do believe that this is fine as it is, and I'm not necessarily feeling like we need to make a lot of changes to it. It's pretty straightforward and pretty simple that we'll make an attempt to fall within the bylaw guidelines for our budgeting process.
Madam President, Larry.
I believe that this almost exact wording was already voted on by the board at the last meeting. We've already agreed that we recommend that the next board consider the budgetary guidelines in the amendment. So I don't see any need for this. It really doesn't turn this into a policy. It actually just turns it into what we've already agreed to.
Paul?
I think the fact that we were comfortable last week, or at the last meeting, saying that we would recommend that to a future board, would be a perfect reason to vote for this policy, because it does strengthen that statement that we made. Otherwise, that's kind of, what did you call it, a fig leaf? Or fig? I mean, that's kind of what that statement last week then was to me, that putting a policy that you would actually have to go through the process of pulling back says to me in a lot more definition that the board supports and is putting what they can behind staying within this bylaw. So I would leave the wording as it originally was, because they're going to consider it anyway. If they want to repeal it, if they want to change the policy, they're going to have to go through some steps to do that, but they still can. I think the responding to the community on this is really important. We're not just leaders that are following rules, we're leaders of a community, and I think it's important to listen to that community. So I would support the original language.
Further comments on the amendment?
Call question.
All those in favor of the amendment to the original motion, please raise your hand.
The amendment is changing the word.
Okay, it is changing it to, and will consider using the limitations defined within the bylaws. All those in favor of the amendment? The motion fails. Now on to the original motion. Discussion on that. Larry?
One last comment. It seems odd to pass a policy that says the board will agree to follow the bylaws. I just think that's very odd. If one wants to say that the board agrees to not abide by the strict letter of the RCWs, well, now that's an interesting statement too. I personally think that this is a dangerous thing to go down. You just don't need to tell the board to abide by. If you want to say anything, you would say using the spirit of the limitations. But I'm not even going that far. All I'm saying is to say that the board will follow something that's within the bylaws makes no sense whatsoever.
Madam President Carroll.
I kind of hear what Larry's saying. I guess I would feel more comfortable, and I guess I'll make this motion, that we change the using limitations to instead saying following the guidelines within the bylaw, because I think there's, yes, maybe we're splitting hairs here, because I am concerned that this could be considered not really a bylaw, and I don't want to open that can of worms. But I think that I can see the board having a concern about stating something that says that it's considering it, when we've been given clear direction from our council that it may not be law. And so maybe we just say it's within the bylaw guidelines. That's
Madam Chair, is there
so there's no.
Would the director like to make a motion?
I did.
She did.
Change it to.
A motion to amend?
Yes, adjust following the guidelines.
All right, can you read it, the whole thing,
Yeah,
please?
and it is the policy of the board that budgets will be developed giving priority to mandated increases and will additionally be adjusted following the guidelines defined within the bylaw that became effective on September 21, 2019.
Second.
Okay, discussion on this amendment. And the amendment is to adjust the end to say, and will additionally be adjusted using the guidelines defined within the bylaw that became effective. Is there a discussion on that amendment? Larry?
I'll just say I'm in favor of it, not just seconding for discussion. I'm in favor of it. That makes sense to me.
Other comments? Voting on the amendment to add replace limitations with using the guidelines. All those in favor of this amendment? 2, 3, 4, 5 in favor. Those opposed? 1. Motion passes. We now have an adjusted underlying motion, which states, "It is the policy of the board that budgets will be developed giving priority to mandated increases and will additionally be adjusted using the guidelines defined within the bylaw that became effective on September the 21st." Discussion on that motion now.
Call the question.
All right, all those in favor of this motion, please raise your hands. 5. We do have a unanimous vote on this. Motion passes.
Thank you, everyone. Let's move into the next policy that I'm proposing. We have, as Director Brown mentioned earlier tonight, we do have a policy about lot gifts. I believe that's what it was titled.
Lot transfers, I believe it was
No,
called.
I'm sorry, it's lot donations.
Donations, yes,
Lot
that's what it was.
donations.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Now, the policy that I'm proposing tonight does relate to lot donations. The policy about donations was from 2001, and it did not address any of the fees that, I'm sorry, it did not discuss demanding advance payment of dues like we do for lot line erasures. We have
A one-year
a one-year
prepayment of
prepaid
dues, yes.
And I want to make sure that we have a policy. We could amend the other policy or combine them at some future time. But we should not be charging advance dues for a lot that is being transferred to Sudden Valley for free. We, right now,
Want to make a motion?
in a moment.
Okay.
You know, actually, I'll make the motion and then I will discuss, so, yes.
And you move with the policy. Okay.
There you go.
All right, it's your second.
So, I make a motion
Okay, we have
that
a
is the
second.
policy of the board that unencumbered lots be transferred to Sudden Valley will not be subject to advance payment of assessments.
Second.
We have second, okay, all
And I
right. You
will-
may discuss.
It's,
As the mover, as the mover.
as I spoke a moment ago about lot line erasure and we get 1 year of advance dues when that happens for that property. If someone falls into arrears on a piece of property, and let's say they just give it back to Sudden Valley, don't we have a deed in lieu program established for that? Where we're not charging, we take that piece of property and then write off the dues that were associated with
Just
it.
point of information, I don't believe it's a program, but it has been the general practice of the board to accept.
Right. And so I believe that that's us actually paying for a piece of property by writing off that back of dues. But if a person right now wants to give a piece of property to Sudden Valley, it's also the practice, as I understand it, to charge 1 or 2 years advance dues for that. Is that the case?
That is the case.
And so I think that it would be fair to not charge, as long as the property were completely unencumbered and there was no deal about, I'm going to give you this lot to turn it into green space or anything like that, unless, of course, it was unbuildable to begin with. But I think that we should not charge members to give a gift to Sudden Valley.
Larry?
I agree with the motion, and in fact, that is consistent with some past practice, where, for instance, a person didn't really know whether it was buildable or not, but they obtained the property through a will, they did not want it, and they gave it to Sudden Valley. Sudden Valley didn't charge them a dime. I believe that was about 7 years ago. First year, or second year maybe, I was on the board. That had some benefit to Sudden Valley in that particular case, and so Sudden Valley was eager to take it. But nonetheless, in years past, we have very frequently not charged to accept properties.
Carol?
I think this is fine. The only concern I have is that there are times when we have allowed the general manager to do some negotiations, because sometimes lots come to us for different reasons, and whether they're donated, sometimes you're saying unencumbered. I'm assuming that the dues are
All dues
are
paid,
all
all
paid and so
taxes, no
forth.
mortgages, et cetera, unencumbered.
And I don't have a problem with the policy with this, but there are times when there are unusual circumstances, and I would hate to take away an opportunity for us to negotiate that if it became necessary. I guess I'm a little nervous about putting a policy like this in place without understanding all the background information that could develop from a piece of property, that's all.
Okay. I have a couple of comments on this. The first one is, in the past, when this situation has arisen, the general manager has brought the gift to the board for the final vote. And so I would make my first amendment to add, after SVCA, must be approved by the board and will not be subject. Okay. Is there a second for that?
Second.
Okay, second on that. Discussion on the amendment for board approval on these transfers? Any discussion, Carol?
Yeah.
Okay.
The only other thing is that we're still in the same situation. We're saying, even if it comes to the board, you have no negotiating room or anything if you need it.
Well,
I
I'm
just
assuming
don't
that the
know.
GM has done all the negotiating beforehand.
I understand,
and will
but
bring
if
the
we're
final to the
accepting
board.
it, if we're just accepting it as a gift, it sounds very clear, but I know there are extremely unusual circumstances
Yes.
sometimes. We
Yes.
know, we have been dealing with them. And I guess I'm just a little concerned about putting this in as, okay, this policy says I don't have to pay any future dues. I mean, I can't imagine what it would be, honestly. It could be a situation where they clear cut the property before they gave it to us. Do you know what I'm saying? There are things
Okay.
that could develop.
This is
that
a
would be
discussion
problem.
of the amendment for board approval, not the underlying motion for whether to accept or not. Do we want to add the phrase for, it must be approved by the board?
Inserted, that's correct?
Yes.
Transferred to SVCA,
Must be, okay, transferred to SVCA and must be approved by the board.
it must be approved by the board. Yeah, okay, all right.
Call the question.
Okay, all those in favor of the amendment to require board approval? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All those opposed? One opposed, motion passes. We now have unencumbered lots being transferred to SVCA must be approved by the board and will not be subject to, et cetera, et cetera. Discussion on the underlying motion. Okay, Mike?
I'm going along with Carol's. I don't think that we should have the policy per se.
Into the microphone, please.
Microphone.
Okay.
I don't think we should have the policy per se. I think each one of these is inherently different and unusual. And I think if you group them all together along the way, you're going to say, geez, I wish we didn't have those like that. I like to just talk about this one. And I like it much better when we can just talk about this one.
Individual.
So I'm against this policy.
Larry?
I'm still toying with exactly how to do it, but I would propose some sort of an amendment to say something along the lines that it's generally not going to be subject to advance payments, because there are circumstances, obviously, when it would be appropriate, but the general approach is, no, you don't have to. Now, how would generally be defined? That's my problem.
Don't have a policy.
Yeah, one approach is to not have this policy at all. The other approach is to say, and will be subject to advance payment of assessments as recommended by staff and approved by the board, et cetera, et cetera. It makes it more complicated, but the point is the board, number one, needs information before it makes a decision. And number two, and so that leaves a role for staff, obviously. And number two, generally, we don't necessarily want to do that, but on a special occasion, we might.
Okay, before we make another amendment, let's do a little more discussing around this topic. Paula?
So we don't currently have a policy that says that we need to be collecting it, and we have no fee schedule for it currently as it is.
It is practice to have done that, but there is no policy that says to do it. And so they've been asking for 2 years advance dues.
With no policy to do so, and
Right.
no.
As I said, that's practice.
Right, I mean, that's,
Yeah.
so, okay.
Joe?
Madam President, we have Carol and then Joe.
Okay. You're
So
on deck.
I agree with following precedents wherever possible. I mean, it's not fair to do one thing for one person and not for another. And I don't know how without, I mean, thank goodness we have stable staff that can go back and check these things. But I guess the only way I'd feel comfortable about this is if we can say may not be subject to advance payment of assessments. I think it's still an open thing, and I don't know that that does anything for you. If you change it that way, it's sort of more up in the air. I just feel like this is, I mean, you could say that that's a general practice, but I don't know if I want to make it a policy just because I'm still, you have to take these things one situation at a time, I think.
Madam
Okay.
President, we
Joe.
have Joe, then Eric.
There's no policy in place. I find it odd, very odd, that you randomly decide to take lots back with no policy. You've had different things with different lots that I've heard here tonight. I think the easiest way to look at it is the board will allow lots to be taken back, subject to approval at a board level. Not so much, you know, if Larry has a lot he wants to give back, there's got to be a process. If it's deemed unbuildable, you got to get a set of Army Corps of Engineers specs for county specs. There's got to be something somewhere. Someone just can't walk in and say, hey, guess what? I don't want the lot anymore. Take it back. It can't work that way. That's the confusion I'm seeing right now from everything that has gone on in the past. So I think the first thing it comes from is, does the board still want to take lots back? And if so, what are the guidelines and limitations for that? Nothing more, nothing less.
Madam President, Eric, and then Larry.
I would not have brought this policy to us tonight to discuss if we had anything published about a fee associated with lot, what was the other policy? Lot gifting or donations. And so if we are charging a fee that's not on the board-approved fee schedule, then that's a problem, right, to begin with. And so we need to either define something about the fees or just not charge it at all and follow the lot donation
As it was.
policy as it was.
Or the practice as it
Yes.
was, okay.
Well,
Because it's
no,
not,
the policy.
it's not a written policy.
The policy for lot donations is a policy,
Okay,
but it does not have any fee associated with it.
Okay.
And we don't have any fees in our fines and fees schedule that the board has approved around it.
okay.
Madam President, we have Larry, then Joe.
In general, I agree with the comment that we need a policy. We need some sort of a standard how to operate. That's just normal, good business practice. I'll put this on later. It's too noisy to do it now. I am also uncomfortable in the extreme, not having a statement that if you give for out of the generosity of your heart, that we're gonna ding you. That just, as I say, it has, to the extent that it's come to my attention, okay? A lot of times this stuff goes on with the GM and has gone on with the GM, and the board really hasn't had anything to do with it whatsoever. So I personally am uncomfortable with that, number one. And number two, I'm very uncomfortable with charging something that is not written down. Now, whether we don't charge at all or charge something every time. I could live with either one of those. I prefer flexibility, frankly, but that still requires a written process.
Madam President, you have Joe, and then Carol, and then you.
Yes, Joe?
You're right. It should be a two-phase thing. You should have a process on what deems a lot to come back, and then there should be a fee which would be charged to that, and that should be set by the board. But there, first and foremost, there needs to be a process of how the lots come back and what they are to, how we deem what we can deem back. That's the first thing. We need a process.
Madam President, Carol, Leslie, and then me.
So Joe said what I was going to say. Essentially, I would say I would like to see the staff actually write a procedure that should be followed in order to research whatever needs to be researched and then bring the recommendation to the board for approval.
I
And
move that we
whether
take, oh, sorry, go ahead.
And whether a fee is involved or not would be decided upon the recommendation of the general manager. And unless there was costs involved in taking the lot back, we may, in fact, decide not to charge a fee.
I move
And
to
you're
table this.
next after Mike.
Oh, okay, go ahead. But a move to
I'm
table has
next.
precedence.
Yes, okay. All right, two things here as far as charge goes. If we take a lot back, there is a cost to do a title change on it. And so this should be a fee that's included in order, in taking these things back, number one. Number two, depending on what we do with it, what kind of a lot it is, there are potential expenses involved, such as if it is a totally unbuildable lot, we can just take title to it and take it off the tax rolls and we're done with it. However, if it is potentially buildable, then we will be holding it until we're able to sell it to somebody who wants to come and build on it, and in order to get another dues-paying member in the organization. And during this time, we have expenses like paying taxes on it, et cetera, et cetera. So there has got to be some sort of fee and cost analysis of how much does it cost us to take this thing back, because it's not free.
So I'll jump in now and say I move to table and refer this to staff to develop a more fully
Talk faster, Larry.
developed
I didn't have to say all that, did I?
Second,
No, you didn't.
second.
Okay. Okay, so this has been tabled. We're turning it over to staff to come back with consideration of all of the different things that we have been talking about here. Thank you. Okay, it's the end of the
You
agenda.
should vote on that motion.
No,
Vote to table?
Well,
We still have to,
yes.
Okay.
My
all in
understanding
favor
of a motion to table is it still requires a vote.
All in favor of tabling this to staff? Okay, it looks like that's unanimous.
Okay, thank you.
Even staff is voting on that one. All right. Okay, property owner comments.
David Narcico of 15 Bramble Way. I've been approached at least a couple of times about lots that have been combined. And I want to get some sort of a clarification or what the board is considering with regards to, at least this was presented to me, is if rescinding, if you have a double lot combined and you have a single payment, that this would be rescinded. So going forward, that double lot will now be two single lots and that your dues will be doubled. Is that, in a sense, if that is the case, and if there is that consideration, I mean, a couple things, is it legal? Number two is, it seems to me if that is the case, then word should get out to the community for people that have those double lots or triple. Years in the past, you could combine 2, 3, 4, 5 lots into one. Does that mean that all those people are now going to have to consider paying 3, 4, 5 times the dues? And anybody from my understanding is, for 2 or 3 reasons, we have very, very small properties at about 6,000 square feet. And over the years, the footprints with garages and everything else and larger footprint homes, they've taken up a heck of a lot. Seems like we've we've encouraged people to have double lots. Now, are we going to go back and rescind that and say, everybody that's combined their lots, we're going to undo that and start all over again? So you're going to get billed double or triple, or if you can, from what I gather in the past, you can combine 3, 4, 5 lots into one. Is this what is being considered by the board? If so, I think it's very important that this information be presented to the community so that people can start planning ahead accordingly. Thank you.
Other comments?
Linda Bradley, 2782. I have a question for you all, and that is, if the budget is rejected in November, do you plan on following the 2019 budget that was approved by us in 2018? The reason I ask that is in our current voting materials, we have the 2020 budget, and then we have something called, help me, what's 2019 projected. There are some serious differences in that and what we voted on. Some of that's concerning to me, but I'll send a written thing because we're not going to be able to discuss it here. The other thing I wanted to bring up is we talked about people donating their lots. When we took Marquis' lots back, I believe he owed us something like $70,000 on those lots in late charges, and I don't think we ever resolved that. I think Jennifer, and I might be wrong, but I think she made an adjustment in the density reduction when we finally sold those and took back some of that, but he owed us a huge amount of money on those lots. And they, you know, he had been dead several years before a realtor brought this all forward or his estate brought it all forward. So there really needs to be some sort of a plan. And I'd like to ask if Lisa could give us an update on where we are with ballots being returned. Thanks.
Other comments? Okay, let me start out with a couple of things here. First of all, the discussion of taking the conjoined lots apart, et cetera, was something that was brought to the board, 6 months or more ago, and we never took any action on it. So I would just, caution you to stop holding on to things that you're afraid of when we have already not taken any action on it when it was brought to the board.
There was a slip of the lip about disinformation.
Okay, the second one is the budget failure. This board cannot speak to that. The next board will deal with that. Okay, and the concern about taking lots back. Back in 2001 or 2, and I can forget the name of the Canadian gentleman who was of the chairman of the board here, who bought up lots and lots and lots, and he stopped paying on them, and he held the lots in one name, and he mortgaged them to a different company, so that if we foreclosed on the lots, then the mortgage would take over and he would get paid that way, and there was nothing we could do except prevent him from building. And after some 10 years, Sudden Valley was out $1 million. He was out $1 million because he couldn't build on these lots. And we finally sat down at the table and we crafted an agreement. He got part of them, we got part of them. When you have these large situations where a lot of money is owed, sometimes you just take what you can get. Yes, now, Larry?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that while it was probably not 6 months ago, we had a thorough discussion, and I believe the gentleman in the membership was here during that discussion, and it was very clearly stated, that the proposal on the table had nothing to do with the double lot conjoining. Nothing whatsoever. There would have been no change. And second of all, the proposal with regard to larger conjoining was completely rejected. Then the board put into the ballot a proposal that would limit the board's authority to change the dues assigned to consolidated lots once they had been approved. And yet there is now all this foo-for-all about voting down everything. Well, if that is voted down, then the community is saying they want the board to have the authority to go back and change those consolidated dues, which makes no sense to me whatsoever. But that is back on the community. The board has already made clear its position. The board says the dues stay as they are. Anything else is complete disinformation, and anybody that listens to disinformation or any other information on social media, that's not appropriate.
Other board comments? Anybody?
There was a question.
Okay, all right.
Move to adjourn?
Ballots, the ballots.
The ballots.
Madam President.
Yeah.
Yeah, how many ballots? What do we got
We
now?
have 245 as of yesterday, with 2 being invalid.
How much?
245 ballots were returned, 2 of which were invalid.
Okay.
The rest of
Okay.
them are all current and valid.
We have a motion to adjourn. All those in favor?
Oy.
We're out at 8:51.
Okay, kick you up quick. Just like that.